This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Mateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Beijing hosts two regional leaders. Cambodia's former prime minister begins a goodwill visit to deepen ironclad ties, while Bangladesh's prime minister meets Premier Lee Chiang as the two sides prepare to sign a raft of agreements. Staying in China, Summer Davos wraps with a clear takeaway. Asia must rethink its energy future as AI demand and geopolitical tensions reshape the region's priorities. Well, elsewhere, India is championing a bigger role for the global south. At South Korea's Jeju Forum, Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar says that cooperation, not division, is a way forward. And a fresh flashpoint in the US-China AI race. Anthropic is accusing Chinese tech giant Alibaba of using fake accounts to gain unauthorized access to its Claude AI model. Also ahead on the bulletin, 76 years on, the Korean War still casts a long shadow. South Korea's president pledges peace, while North Korea sharpens its preparedness for confrontation. Plus, by day, it's a city park. And by night, it's a rat buffet. How AI is helping Hong Kong in its fight against rodents. China and Cambodia signaling a renewed commitment to closer ties as former Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen begins a goodwill visit to Beijing. Now, Mr. Hun Sen is leading a delegation of senior government and ruling party officials. He is expected to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping, Premier Lee Chiang, and other senior leaders. Cambodia's ruling party says that the trip reflects both countries' commitment to strengthening their ironclad friendship and also expanding cooperation under their comprehensive strategic partnership. Now, the visit comes as Cambodia looks to deepen economic ties with its largest trading partner and one of its biggest sources of foreign investment. Now, for more on this visit, we have CNA's Crystal Chia joining us live from Shanghai. So, Crystal, this is framed as a goodwill visit. So can we expect realistically any solid outcomes from this visit?
Yeah, so the two sides will likely reaffirm their political commitments, similar to when Foreign Minister Wang Yi visited Cambodia in April. Now, Cambodia is likely to reiterate its support for the One China policy, while Beijing will do the same for Cambodia's sovereignty and development. Now, they might also talk about the newly established China-Cambodia 2+2 dialogue, which involves both countries' foreign and defense ministers. And on the business front, the Cambodia Chamber of Commerce said that it will meet with Chinese businesses during the visit. No major agreements have been announced, but the visit is expected to reinforce investor confidence. Now, China ranks first among all of Cambodia's foreign investment sources, accounting for 54% of the total approved investment capital in 2025. So perhaps this visit would also pave the way for future partnerships.
And also, Crystal, President Xi has often described the relationship as ironclad, but are there, any cracks or even points of tensions in this particular relationship?
Yeah, so to provide a sense of the ironclad friendship, let's go back to 2020. That was when China was battling the COVID pandemic. Countries were restricting travel. They were evacuating citizens out of China. But Hun Sen actually visited Beijing to show support for the Chinese people. And in his future visits, he signed free trade agreements and advanced the Belt and Road project. So when President Xi visited Cambodia in April last year, he described relations as an all-weather partnership. But there are also complexities in this relationship. Border issues between Cambodia and Thailand remain unresolved. China has acted as a mediator, encouraging dialogue between the two countries. In terms of economic relations, Cambodia's growing trade deficit with China remains a concern. Year to date, that's at about $7.8 billion US dollars. And finally, there's also the issue of scam hubs. Now, in January, China told Cambodia that the disappearances of Chinese people may affect ties. So following that, in April, a Chinese-Cambodian businessman linked to a huge scam network was extradited to China. The arrest being framed by China's foreign ministry as cooperation in law enforcement with Cambodia and its neighboring countries. Oteli?
Well, thanks for unpacking China-Cambodia relations for us. CNA's Crystal Chia speaking to us live from Shanghai. 3 days of high-level discussions at the World Economic Forum's Summer Davos have put Asia's energy transition firmly in the spotlight. Rising electricity demand from AI, geopolitical tensions in the Middle East, and Asia's continued reliance on imported fuels are forcing governments to rethink their priorities. CNA's Tan Sihui wraps up at Dalian with this report.
Asia's appetite for energy is only growing. Electricity demand across the Asia-Pacific is expected to jump nearly 60% over the next decade, driven by AI, data centers, and industrialization. But recent tensions in the Middle East have underscored the region's reliance on imported energy.
The challenge here is this. If we do not secure oil and gas from other countries, Asia is going to be short. And as a result, you do see a potential economic impact. I think a lot of focus is definitely going to be around energy security. It's going to be around where you secure your gas and oil from. And there is a fundamental question in terms of whether governments and policymakers would push for an accelerated, I would say in this case, energy transition, but more so deployment of alternative technologies to reduce oil and gas demand.
Analysts say the biggest bottleneck now is infrastructure and policy. That's as energy systems become more complex, with power generated not just from large centralized plants, but also increasingly complemented by alternate sources, such as smaller utility-scale rooftop solar panels.
One is renewable is intermittent, and you need storage, you need investment, adequate investment in storage. I think related to that is you need adequate investment in transmission and distribution, not just generation of energy. And third is you need frameworks in place that make it very easy for investors to put in large amounts of capital, which they're only going to get a return on over a 10-year period. So stability of policy, simplicity of policy, competitiveness of policy versus other major competing regions is important.
From renewable energy cost to battery deployment, observers say China is increasingly becoming the defining factor in Asia's energy transition. The topic was also featured at the Summer Davos, where a panel examined China's energy system. As geopolitical tensions prompt countries to rethink their energy strategies, speakers said many are looking to China for lessons, with Chinese officials taking the opportunity to call for greater international cooperation.
The future of renewable energy is very broad for the whole world. So even we are at the very initial stage. There is opportunity for each country. The question is whether you have changed your attitude and you are ready to make investment and boost the development.
Success, analysts say, will depend on striking the right balance, tapping China's expertise and technology while strengthening local industries and diversifying supply chains. For governments across the region, the goal is not just a cleaner energy system, but one that's also more secure and resilient. Tan Sihui, CNA, Dalian, China.
Now at the Summer Davos, Premier Li Qiang cast innovation is the driving force behind China's long-term economic growth, with AI at the forefront. He also called for greater and faster regulation amid fears of disruption to labor markets and security risks. CNA's Olivia Seong sat down with S&P Global's chief economist, who explained how much AI could boost the outlook for Asian economies.
First, I think the investment story is pretty well kind of baked in, right? We're doing a big infrastructure build in the U.S., like building the digital economy with all these data centers, and we know who the hyperscalers are who are funding this. So this is a big boost to U.S. growth. It's actually accounting, in our view, for about 1/2 of the 2% U.S. growth we see right now. But there's also some beneficiaries in the rest of the world, and that's where we come to Asia, because these hyperscalers are importing some of the high-end AI, the chips and other things. So that's a Taiwan story, it's a Thailand story, it's a Vietnam story, a little of that getting channeled through Mexico. Korea's on the memory side, but we've got a small group of Asian economies who are really benefiting kind of in line with the U.S. data center build, and that's just a huge multi-year tailwind to growth for them.
Let's talk about the other powerful force at work here, the global uncertainties. And in that same note, we know that the uncertainty, particularly around the Strait of Hormuz, has highlighted the vulnerabilities with energy, especially here in Asia. Yeah. Your baseline assumption in that note is that that risk gradually decreases. But what's to happen if that assumption proves wrong? What could be the biggest consequence for Asian economies?
Yeah, well, Asia's kind of a story of two groups of countries. So we originally thought when the strait was closed, energy exporters are going to be okay and energy importers are going to have some, turbulence. But then we had to think more deeply, and we've actually thought a lot about the important role of inventories. And we know that China in particular, but also Japan and Korea built up their inventory. So they've been pretty insulated from the downside risk. They get the price impact, but not the volume impact. It looks now with the MOU between the U.S. and Iran, prices have come down, and our baseline's got that gradually normalizing. If that does not happen, then those inventories are finite. So it may not be China. China has enormous inventories. But over time, if we don't settle this, those inventories are going to be drawn down. We could go back to a period of, price spikes on oil, and that's bad for, destroying purchasing power, bad for growth, and that's the downside scenario. But that, I think, is a little bit less likely because the MOU looks like it's going to probably improve things for the rest of the year. But that's kind of the big swing variable for us right now in the global outlook.
But how does the outlook factor in the uncertainty? Because overnight, we've seen signs of strain. The U.S. pushing back against Iran, saying that it will charge for any movement through the strait.
Yeah, but what we did not do was put our oil price assumptions back to, pre-Hormuz crisis levels when we learned of the MOU. We actually haven't lowered them yet, so we've got them gradually returning to kind of the $70 range over the next year or two. So we've actually got a lot of caution baked into our scenario, which is why we said the risks are on the upside, because we didn't immediately put them down to the current spot price, which was kind of 75, 80-ish. So we're being very cautious in updating that scenario. But it looks like directionally, at least we're in the right way, but we're not assuming that this is going to be linear or, without any turbulence. So it's going to be a bumpy ride back to normality. That's the way we're thinking about it.
Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, as demand for AI chips surges, Japan targets more than $2 trillion in investment to build up its semiconductor sector. Plus, South Korea's red-hot stock market may be getting too hot to handle. The main exchange is delaying a new trading product amid concerns about market froth. We'll break it all down for you after this break. You're watching East Asia Tonight. Let's get you caught up with the latest business news with Roland. So, Roland, just a day after Alibaba sued the Pentagon for alleged accusation of Chinese military ties, Alibaba's reputation is now apparently called into question.
Yes, Alibaba's AI ambitions takes a hit with an accusation from US AI company Anthropic. Now, Alibaba shares in Hong Kong on a slippery slope, hitting a 16-month low after Anthropic accused the Chinese tech giant of illicitly accessing its artificial intelligence model. The stock tumbled as much as 4.4%, extending this year's decline to 36%. The American AI firm alleges the campaign ran from late April to early June, generating almost 29 million exchanges with Claude through nearly 25,000 fraudulent accounts. Now, Anthropic added that the effort used a technique known as distillation, which trains a less capable model on outputs of a stronger one. It said that the goal was to speed up China's efforts to match the capabilities of its advanced Mythos preview AI model. Anthropic's accusations heightened the investor unease over the ability of Chinese tech firms to compete in the global AI race, though they have so far managed to offer reasonably priced, good enough products. Anthropic also said the operation was linked to Alibaba and its AI lab, Quen. Alibaba has not responded to the allegations. Alibaba was added, to the Pentagon's Chinese military companies list this month. That's a designation that it is challenging. A Japanese Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, has reportedly unveiled a plan for massive spending in AI and other strategic sectors spread over the next 14 years. The $2.3 trillion proposal is unprecedented in size and scale and will be funded by both public and private sectors. Just under a third is earmarked for semiconductors and artificial intelligence. Now, details are yet to be finalized, but Prime Minister Takaichi has taken an aggressive approach to spur growth in the world's fourth largest economy. Investors are split on Ms. Takaichi's economic agenda. Now, while her push for large-scale investment has lifted the country's equity market, pushing the Nikkei past the 70,000 mark earlier this month, concerns over fiscal sustainability has also risen, driving up long-term government bond yields to multi-decade highs. It is also unclear how much fresh spending would be part of the latest plan, on top of those already set aside by the private sector. SK Hynix push for a $29 billion US listing, boosting its share price. Shares finishing up 13% higher today. The stock has surged more than 800% over the past year, lifting the company's market value to above $1 trillion. Analysts say the fundraising will accelerate production of high-bandwidth memory chips, a critical component for AI, while also expanding access to global investors. The American Depository Receipts, or ADRs, are due to begin trading on July 10th. The listing underscores strong investor appetite for AI-related stocks, despite recent volatility in U.S. tech and semiconductor markets. It also comes as major technology companies race to fund costly AI infrastructure. Earlier this month, Alphabet unveiled plans to raise $80 billion through equity offerings to finance its AI expansion. Now, just a day after SK Hynix says it's planning to list on the NASDAQ, well, another chip-making giant is also eyeing U.S. capital markets, this time from neighboring Japan. Kioxia says it wants to offer U.S. depository receipts by the first half of next year in a bid to capitalize on surging investor demand for semiconductor stocks. The AI boom has propelled Kioxia to become Japan's most valuable company by market cap, overtaking SoftBank and Toyota in recent weeks. Kioxia specializes in NAND, or flash storage, and demand for data storage has boomed as AI models grow larger and require more space. Shares of Kioxia closing the day up more than 12%, and the company stock has rocketed more than 7,000% since it went public in Tokyo on December 2024. Equity markets trading mostly higher, led by gains in tech stocks after Micron Technology's stronger than expected earnings and upbeat sales forecast, reinforcing confidence in the AI boom. The Kospi led the charge in the region, closing the day more than 5% higher. The Taiwan-weighted index and the Nikkei 225 also logging solid gains. Chipmaker stocks fronted the rally on renewed confidence in AI-driven demand. Samsung Electronics, SK Hynix jumping. SK Hynix yesterday announcing plans to raise some $29 billion through the U.S. stock market, listing to capitalize on strong investor appetite for AI stocks. Advantest and Tokyo Electron also closed the day in the green, well ahead. The regional rally also being helped by another plunge in oil prices to below pre-war levels for the first time. That's amid growing optimism over U.S.-Iran peace talks and news of more ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz.
South Korea's stock market has been one of the world's hottest trades this year, powered by the AI chip boom. But now the Korea Exchange is delaying a planned launch of weekly single stock options next week for Samsung Electronics, SK Hynix, Hyundai Motor, as well as LG Energy Solutions. So we've got Roland here. He's on hand to explain what is exactly behind the decision. So what happened, Roland?
Yeah, extreme market volatility. I mean, and the timing of this is important because remember, we've seen violent swings. On Tuesday, we had the benchmark Kospi index plummet 10%. Next day, it was back up 9%. And another time earlier this month, it was up, or down, I should say, 8% one day, up again 8% the next day. So that's extraordinary volatility for a major benchmark like the Kospi index.
So these major swings, Roland, why has the Korean market become so volatile?
Yeah, it has to do because right now the stock markets in Korea is basically retail driven, and it is chasing the AI chip boom. What I mean by that is that, Samsung shares, it's tripled in the last 6 months alone. SK Hynix has surged 5 times. So that's quite an amazing increase. And together today, these two chip makers are more than 50% of the benchmark Kospi index weighting alone. And what I mean by the retail angle is this. Right now, in the adult population, more than 50% of them actually have brokerage accounts. Now, you compare that back in 2019, that percentage penetration was only 21%. On top of which, we also have the margin debt. That's the amount of money that's borrowed to buy shares, and that has surged to a record 37 trillion won. That's about $24 billion. So that's an extraordinary amount of money chasing just very few shares.
And I mean, there are also concerns about leveraged ETFs, right? That's tied to Samsung and SK Hynix. What do you think went wrong there?
Yeah, well, the regulators are very embarrassed about that because leveraged single stock ETFs and the weekly single stock options that you just announced that it's been delayed, that they're different instruments, but they basically do the same thing. They amplify the volatility. So in the case of leveraged ETFs, what it was promising was to double on whatever the performance of that stock was. So in the case of SK Hynix, if, say, for example, SK Hynix shares went up 2%, well, the ETF value would go up 4%. And vice versa, if the stock went down 5%, well, then the ETF should go down 10%. But do you know what happened? On the 8th of June, that's 3 weeks ago, the ETF value went up more than 50%. But the stock itself went down 7.7%. So the ETF value was basically trading on its own momentum. So it was, unhinged from the actual stock price.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many numbers to keep track of. I'm glad somebody is doing just that. But Roland, what about the exchange? Why then is the exchange trying to basically introduce these weekly single stock options at all?
Yeah, well, these stock options during normal times, they're used as a hedge, as insurance, and they're usually bought up by companies or institutions. So say, for example, a company owns, say, 10 million shares or 10 million won worth of Samsung shares, and they're worried that its share price will fall by 30%. So what they then do is then they buy into a put option, which would then allow them, if the share price falls more than 30%, to sell at the current price that they're holding it at. Okay, so say, for example, the share did fall 31%. So they call on that put option, so they get back most of the monies from that sale. I say most of it because there's still a tiny amount that they did spend on the premium to buy that option in the first place. But in the case of the retail investors today, what they are doing is essentially they're placing bets on shares that they don't actually have. Okay, so what's that doing? And they're doing in record numbers. So that's, I guess, the best analogy I could give for that action is that if you were handing out matches at a petrol station, and I don't think regulators want to know what will happen to those people you've dished out those matches to.
Well, thanks for helping us make sense of the market volatility. Roland Lim there from the Business Desk. Right, we are going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Bangladeshi Prime Minister Tariq Rahman holds talks with Chinese Premier Li Qiang in Beijing. It's all part of his first overseas tour since taking office, as Dhaka looks to shore up ties with partners in the region. Now, an expert will be joining us after the break to unpack what the visit signals about Dhaka's foreign policy priorities. Plus, India's foreign minister pushes for global cooperation, S. Jaishankar urging the global south to play a bigger role in shaping the world order. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. A flurry of high-level diplomacy in China as it looks to shore up regional ties. Beijing is playing host to former Cambodian leader Hun Sen, as well as Bangladesh's Prime Minister Tariq Rahman. Summer Davos wraps 3 days of high-level discussions in China's Dalian city with a clear takeaway. Asia must rethink its energy future as AI demand and geopolitical tensions reshape the region's priorities. 76 years on, the Korean War still casts a long shadow over the peninsula. South Korea's president pledges peace, while North Korea sharpens its preparedness for confrontation. A Bangladeshi Prime Minister Tariq Rahman and a Chinese Premier Li Qiang holding talks in Beijing as Dhaka seeks to strengthen ties with its largest trading partner. Now, Mr. Rahman is on his first overseas trip since taking office in February. Beijing and Dhaka reportedly seeking to deepen cooperation across trade, infrastructure, and energy. Mr. Rahman invited Chinese firms to expand their manufacturing value chains into Bangladesh, pitching the country as a competitive investment destination. Now, he also announced plans to open Bangladesh's first investment office in China. The Bangladeshi Prime Minister is scheduled to meet President Xi Jinping tomorrow. And for more insights, we are joined now by Lailufa Yasmin, Professor of International Relations at the University of Dhaka. Well, thanks, Prof, for joining us this evening. Now, among some of the agreements that was mentioned, Professor, that there is a possibility that Bangladesh could advance its plans to buy maybe 24 Chinese fighter jets. If that were to happen, I mean, how big a deal is that?
Thank you for having me. In fact, this is a much anticipated deal. Bangladesh has long been trying to modernize its armed forces. It lacks a couple of areas, and this purchasing of these fighter jets will fill that vacuum in Bangladesh's sort of defense, because under its 2030 modernization goal of armed forces, it wants to sort of develop a multidimensional sort of armed forces, and that is why this deal is going to be extremely significant. And if it is done, it will open up new possibilities for Bangladesh.
So beyond the headlines, we look at a whole range of agreements expected from tech to investments. We've got possibly Bangladesh's first investment office in China as well. Based on what we're hearing on all of that, what does it tell us about Bangladesh's priorities when it comes to its relationship with China?
China has been a very trusted ally of Bangladesh, and for quite some time, because the relationship now has moved to a strategic level. And this tells that we are not only heavily looking at China for investment, but also we are looking for some soft loans. We are looking for a technology transfer. We are looking for opening up investment office, which will help Chinese investors to understand about Bangladesh before they have to come here. And in terms of trade, we import some of the basic items, raw materials for our budding, RNG sector. So we need to create this relationship in such a manner so that this can actually help Bangladesh to, develop and increase its trade, because Bangladesh is no longer an aid-dependent country. It has moved to being a trade-dependent country where China plays a significant role.
So you've mentioned about Bangladesh-China relations today, that actually they've moved up to a strategic level, their relations. So do you think it's a huge part of it has to do with the recent political transition in Dhaka, and that has changed the trajectory of this relationship?
No. In fact, China-Bangladesh relationship was moving to a strategic level for last about 17, 18 years. And especially after July uprising that happened in 2024, what happened is that there has been a qualitative shift in China-Bangladesh relationship, as in China has started to invest more in understanding Bangladesh. It is no longer dependent on a political narrative of one political party, as used to happen during the Awami League regime. Instead, it has started connecting with the academia, with the members of other political party, with the member of the major political parties. And you would see that how China invested in taking delegations, starting from academia, media, political party members, cultural, personalities to China to sort of tell us what they can offer to Bangladesh and how Bangladesh and China can create a meaningful relationship, not only at the government level, but also at the people-to-people level. So it has taken a qualitative shift, but a strategic relationship was developing for last more than decades.
All right. And well, this visit, though, began in Malaysia, and that caught a lot of attention. People were talking about it. Is Bangladesh signaling that, perhaps it's looking beyond South Asia and becoming more economically aligned or connected to Southeast Asia?
This provides a couple of signals, actually, where you're quite correct that Bangladesh wants to signal that it needs to be strategically aligned with Southeast Asia more, because we need to have that, connection. Our labor market lies in a big chunk in Southeast Asia. But at the same time, we need to understand that we cannot, not think of South Asia, because we share the fifth longest land border with India. We have to have working relationship, because we have a lot of issues and a lot of areas that we share with India. So it cannot be seen at the cost of India, but it must have to be seen Bangladesh is opening up a sort of a new area of strategic autonomy, or to understand what is more significant for Bangladesh. And that is why this government has proclaimed of Bangladesh before all, or Bangladesh first foreign policy, where our strategic requirements would be the building block of our foreign policy roles. And that is why we have seen that Malaysia has worked as a strategic diversion or strategic distraction as the first destination for the PM's visit. Why I'm saying this? Because this is only possibly the third time that any Bangladeshi head of the state has visited Malaysia. Having said that, Malaysia has a number of short-term, long-term and strategic significance for us, not only labor market, but also Bangladesh is planning to diversify its economy. There are prospects of expanding halal economy. There are prospects of learning from Malaysia about in a lot of areas. There can be educational exchange, there can be scientific exchange, there can be technology exchange. So in a lot of ways, and we also require to create a semi-skilled population, because we have a large number of unskilled labor that we provide to the rest of the world. And Bangladesh has also a large number of online labor. Bangladesh, in fact, second in providing online labor to the world. So we can also make the best use of this kind of asset to for the South Asian countries. But the issue is that many people are not aware of what Bangladesh can offer. So from that perspective, this visit has also been extremely significant.
Well, many thanks for your insights there, Lailufa Yasmin, Professor of International Relations at the University of Dhaka, unpacking China-Bangladesh relations.
Thank you.
Now, India is pushing for the Global South to play a bigger role in shaping the world order. Top diplomat S. Jaishankar making that call at the Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity in South Korea, where he advocated for deeper cooperation as a solution to what he called a fragmented world. In a keynote address, Mr. Jaishankar said that fragmentation is now a permanent feature of global affairs, but warned that its risks can only be managed through greater cooperation. Now, he called for a more multipolar world with stronger supply chains, closer ties among influential nations, and greater opportunities for the Global South. The address comes a day after Mr. Jaishankar met his South Korean counterpart Cho Hyun in Seoul. They pledged to deepen strategic ties amid growing global uncertainty. Now, Ishan Garg has been tracking the story for CNA, and he joins us live from New Delhi. Ishan, Mr. Jaishankar says that the Global South deserves a greater role in shaping the international order. What exactly is India trying to push for here?
Well, India's message has been kind of this at many bilateral and multilateral forums, that it wants the Global South to have a bigger say at the global level, whether it's the BRICS forum, whether it's Prime Minister Modi traveling to the G7 summit just days ago. India's message has been consistently that the Global South, the voice of the Global South, needs to be heard. Now, analysts in New Delhi said that this is the message India is trying to pass on, as it wants to be seen as the voice of the Global South. But there is also India's core foreign policy at play here. India is batting for what it calls multilateralism. It comes at a time when India has been critical of multilateral institutions like the United Nations, saying that those institutions need reform. And it is now looking to rely on countries of the Global South, countries like South Korea, to carry out those reforms, or at least back the idea of reforms at multilateral institutions like the United Nations. External Affairs Minister's S. Jaishankar's speech also focused on something that is very relevant for Global South countries. He talked about the risks that come with advancing technologies and how in a fragmented world those technologies can be manipulated and therefore could be destructive as well. But he also said that this a fragmented world also means that there isn't a unipolarity in the world anymore. And this is the fact that he wanted to highlight, that if countries that are considered so-called middle powers, if they come together, countries like India and South Korea, they can have a more impactful role on the global stage.
And Mr. Jaishankar, well, is holding talks with his South Korean counterpart, probably talking about that as well. But do we know what were some of the key outcomes from those discussions?
Well, we don't have a concrete list of the outcomes, but we understand that this visit by External Affairs Minister was a follow-up visit and kind of a reciprocal visit also after South Korea's President Lee visited India earlier in April. And back then, the two countries talked about how they wanted to nearly double their bilateral trade over the next few years. They also talked about how they wanted to collaborate in multiple areas. Back then, the focus was on semiconductors, on shipbuilding together, energy and infrastructure. And this visit by the Foreign Minister of India was a follow-up to that, to ensure that the vision that was set in place by the leaders of the two countries, that is going to be taken forward by the ministers there. S. Jaishankar talked about how complementary India and South Korea's foreign policy and their capabilities are during this visit.
India and the Republic of Korea must cooperate more closely. We have complementarities. We have many complementarities in many fields, from ships to chips, and also health, infrastructure, or defense, which are just waiting to be exploited.
Now, India has already attracted a lot of investment from South Korea, and experts as well as government officials here say that there is still a lot more potential in this relationship for both countries, with South Korea supplying a lot of its critical and emerging technologies, and India participating with its massive talented labor pool.
Hey, thanks for that report. Ishan Garg there, speaking for CNA from New Delhi. Now, today marks the 76th anniversary of the outbreak of war in Korea. And South Korean President Lee Jae-myung has vowed to build a Korean peninsula free from the fear of conflict. It was marked in the south with a national ceremony in Gyeonggi province, attended by hundreds of veterans, government and military officials. President Lee Jae-myung awarded national honors to those whose wartime service had gone unrecognized. He said that the best way to honor those who fought and died in the war was to ensure future generations can live without the threat of conflict. Well, North Korea, meanwhile, struck a very different tone. An editorial in the ruling Workers' Party newspaper, Rodong Sinmun, repeated Pyongyang's long-standing claim that the Korean War began with a U.S. planned invasion under a, quote, well-crafted script. Now, the paper also called on North Koreans to maintain strong anti-U.S. sentiment and stay prepared for continued confrontation with South Korea and the United States. The Korean War began on 25th of June 1950 when North Korean troops invaded South Korea in tanks and on foot. It ended with an armistice in 1953, but no peace treaty was ever signed, leaving the Korean peninsula technically still at war nearly 8 decades later. Coming up on East Asia tonight, Japan assesses the damage left after a powerful 7.2 magnitude earthquake struck its northern coast. And in one of the world's densest cities, rats are proving hard to beat. Why Hong Kong is looking to artificial intelligence for help. A powerful 7.2 magnitude earthquake has struck Japan's northern coast. The country's weather agency says there is no danger of a tsunami, but urges the public to remain on alert for further quakes over the next week. A strong tremors impacted high-rise buildings in multiple locations, and authorities say there are no immediate reports of injuries or damage. Now, East Japan Railway earlier suspended several train services, including the Tohoku Shinkansen high-speed rail line. Some of these services have since resumed. Authorities have shut some expressway routes for inspections. Now, at least 110 schools across affected areas have been temporarily closed. Tohoku Electric Power and other companies said that there are no reports of irregularities at their nuclear power plants. Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi says that the government is working closely with local authorities to help those in need. Now, it's one of the world's densest places, so Hong Kong doesn't really have much room to spare, but rats seem to have no problem finding space. Now, the city has now turned to AI to fight its long-running battle against the rodent. CNA's Hong Kong team with this report.
In the day, this park belongs to the people of Hong Kong. But when night falls, a different kind of resident takes over. To us, it's garbage. To them, it's an all-you-can-eat buffet.
I used to live in one area and there were a lot of rats. And then when I moved to a new place, still a lot of rats. They're huge. They're really big. Yeah.
Since 2024, the city has turned to AI to tackle the problem using these thermal imaging cameras. AI analyzes the thermal images and generates a metric called the rodent absence rate, or RAR. That's the percentage of images showing no rats.
I think it's one measurement that has to be added to several other measurements. We measure food sources, how available food is, and does that increase or decrease? We measure how many rat signs do we see, say, in a park. Rats love parks. And so we will count all their rat burrows, and we will add that up. So we put all these things in a formula, if you will, to add up to the big picture.
Hong Kong's Food and Environmental Hygiene Department says last year's data shows significant improvement in the more infested areas. But dozens of survey locations in the city registered an RAR of less than 80%. So that means more than 20% or more than 1 in 5 of the images taken show rats.
Well, I must recognize the efforts the government departments are putting in combating rodent population and helping with improving the hygiene situation of some of the districts in Hong Kong. It is also very important for the government to communicate honestly where are we now at the moment.
In May, the city recorded its first human case of rat hepatitis E for the year. About 1 in 5 rats carry the virus, and people could potentially be infected by food or water contaminated by rat waste, although cases are rare. Common symptoms include fever, nausea, and vomiting, or none at all, although severe cases could lead to liver failure.
There have been an accumulating number of cases globally. So to date, we've recorded more than 50 cases, 50. In Hong Kong, this has become the most common rodent to human kind of virus. I say most common, that doesn't mean there are a large number of cases, but every time there's a case, it makes us take notice, it makes public health officials take notice about what's going on with the rodent infestation.
Rats hide deep within the city's drains and sewers, so experts say it's impossible to know how many there are. They're also impossible to eliminate.
So we need to just look in the mirror and say we can do better with our own behavior in our own nest. And rats are a predictor of we're not taking care of our own nest. They're telling us if there's many rats, you are not taking care of this area.
For a city of more than 7 million people, Hong Kong's rat problem is an environmental management problem, and the experts say everyone is responsible.
It looks like South Korea's fate in the FIFA World Cup tournament in limbo after losing to South Africa, missing out on the top 2 spots in the group to advance to the knockout stages. Disappointment on the streets of Seoul this morning, with thousands gathered at Gwanghwamun Square to support the national team. 1 goal was all it took for South Africa to head to the next round, joining Group A leader Mexico. But all hope isn't lost just yet. The Taeguk Warriors are banking on becoming one of the best third-placed teams for a spot in the last 32.
오늘 결과에 믿을 수가 없고 당연히 그러니까 이길 확률이 높다고 해가지고 막 너무 신나서 왔는데 그래서 이제 또 출근을 저는 해러 가야 되거든요. 그래서 근데 지금 기분이 이래가지고 출근을 해서 또 일을 해야 한다는 게 너무 속상하긴 한데 어쨌든 이제 막 다 끝난 건 아니니까.
오늘 경기 비록 졌지만 그리고 전반전 후반전에서 정말 아쉬운 모습도 많이 있었지만 그래도 저희가 이렇게 아쉬움이 큰 만큼 선수들도 정말 아쉬움이 많을 거라고 생각합니다. 이제 오늘 경기를 좀 더 복귀하고 더 발전된 모습으로 다음 경기를 치를 수 있도록 저희가 32강 꼭 들어갈 수 있도록 그런 행운이 저희에게 찾아왔으면 좋겠고요.
And that wraps up this Thursday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Now, for our Singapore audience, do stay on for highlights from the FIFA World Cup. Thanks for watching.
South Africa scored the only goal of their match against South Korea to progress to the knockout stage for the first time ever. The second half strike helping Bafana Bafana progress, with South Korea now waiting to find out if they qualify as one of the best third-place teams. And a second half goal gave Mexico the lead in the other Group A match in Mexico City. The co-hosts went on to score 2 more to top the group with a 100% winning record. But a nightmare start for Scotland as Brazil took an early lead through Vinicius Jr. And it was the same player again as the Real Madrid striker not at home. The match wrapped up in the second half as Manchester United's Matheus Cunha sent Brazil through in top spot in Group C. A wonder strike from Wilson Isidore wasn't enough to give Haiti their first win of the World Cup, as Morocco twice came from behind to win 4-2. The Atlas Lions progressing from Group C in second place after tying on 7 points with Brazil. Switzerland booked their place in the last 32 after beating co-host Canada in Vancouver. Goals from Ruven Vargas and Johan Manzambi gave the Europeans a 2-1 win as Canada finished runners-up as they also progressed. Bosnia also clinched a spot in the round of 32 as one of the top third-place finishers after beating Qatar 3-1. The pick of the goals coming from teenager Karim Alabegovic.